brutally beaten by her own father, until the Alpha King's war beast knelt rose to protect her. "Get up!" Clyde hissed, the heavy leather belt snapping viciously against the cold stone floor. "You think you can embarrass me today, of all days?" Blood trickled lazily from Ivalice's split lip, tasting of copper and despair. "I did nothing," she whispered, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf in a hurricane. "You breathe, and it costs me," he roared, raising his hand again. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the bone-jarring impact. But the blow never came. Instead, a guttural, earth-shaking growl echoed through the courtyard, freezing the blood in Clyde's veins. The Alpha King's beast had arrived. The Blackwood estate was a place of shadows, an ancient manor that seemed to absorb the little sunlight that dared pierce the canopy of the surrounding pine forest. For Ivalice, it was not a home. It was a beautifully decorated purgatory. Her father, Clyde Matthews, the alpha of the Blackwood pack, ruled his territory with an iron fist and a fragile ego. He was a man who demanded absolute perfection, and in his eyes, Ivalice was the ultimate flaw. She knelt on the polished hardwood floor of the grand dining hall, a bucket of soapy water beside her, her hands raw and blistered. The grand clock in the corner ticked methodically, each second a painful reminder of the impending doom. Today was the day the Alpha King, Alden Ravenshire, was scheduled to arrive. "You missed a spot, rat," a sickeningly sweet voice chimed from the doorway. Ivalice didn't need to look up to know it was Faye Barnes, her stepsister. Faye stood there, draped in silk and dripping with entitlement, leaning against her mother, Phoebe Norton. Phoebe, Clyde's second wife, was a woman whose beauty was only matched by her venom. She had successfully poisoned Clyde's mind against his own flesh and blood years ago, turning Ivalice from a pack princess into an indentured servant. "I'll clean it, Faye," Ivalice murmured, her voice hoarse. She kept her head down, allowing her long, dark hair to shield her bruised cheek from view, a parting gift from Clyde the night before when she had accidentally dropped a silver fork during dinner preparations. See that you do," Phoebe sneered, adjusting an emerald necklace that had once belonged to Ivalice's late mother. "King Alden is not a forgiving man. They say he's a savage, a monster in human skin. If he sees this place looking like a pigsty, your father will skin you alive, and frankly, Ivalice, I would happily hand him the knife." Ivalice scrubbed harder, the coarse bristles tearing at her already damaged skin. The rumors about the Alpha King were terrifying. Alden Ravenshire had conquered the northern territories through sheer brutal force. He wasn't just an alpha, he was a legend whispered about to frighten disobedient pups. But the most terrifying rumor wasn't about the king himself, it was about his shadow. The War Beast, a creature so massive and volatile that it was said to feast on the bones of traitors. Faye, Phoebe!" Clyde's booming voice echoed down the hallway, preceded by the heavy, authoritative thud of his boots. He swept into the dining hall, a man of imposing stature but weak character, constantly overcompensating for his insecurities with cruelty. His eyes instantly locked onto Ivalice, and his lip curled in disgust. Why is she still out here?" Clyde demanded, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. He turned to his beta, Ricky Jenkins, a weasel of a man who always agreed with whatever Clyde said. "Ricky, I told you to lock her in the cellar until the king departs. Do you want Alden to think my bloodline is tainted by this pathetic, weak creature?" Ricky flinched. "I'm sorry, Alpha. I thought she was needed to clean—" "I don't pay you to think," Clyde snapped. He crossed the room in 3 massive strides, grabbing Ivalice by the back of her frayed collar and hauling her to her feet. The sudden movement sent a spike of agonizing pain through her bruised ribs. She gasped, stumbling against the heavy oak table. "Look at you!" Clyde spat, his grip tightening until she couldn't breathe. "A disgrace. If you ruin this alliance for me, Ivalice, I swear to the goddess you won't live to see the next moon." He shoved her roughly to the floor. "Get out of my sight, go to the kitchens and stay hidden." As Ivalice scrambled to her feet, desperate to escape, the deafening sound of war horns shattered the tense silence. The vibration rattled the crystal chandeliers above. The king had not just arrived, he was at the gates. Panic erupted in the hall. Clyde hurriedly smoothed his coat, barking orders at Ricky and Phoebe, while Ivalice slipped into the shadows of the servants' corridor, her heart pounding a frantic, terrifying rhythm against her ribs. The monster was here. The courtyard of Blackwood Estate was transformed into a theater of absolute dread. Ivalice, unable to resist the terrible pull of curiosity, peered through a crack in the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen that overlooked the grand entrance. The king's entourage was unlike anything the Blackwood pack had ever witnessed. It wasn't a parade of vanity. It was a display of lethal, calculated power. Armored guards with eyes like winter frost marched in perfect unison. At the head of the formation rode Basil Turner, the king's beta. Basil was a mountain of a man with a stern, scarred face, his gaze sweeping over the Blackwood wolves as if analyzing exactly how long it would take to slaughter them all. But Ivalice's breath caught in her throat when her eyes landed on the man walking just behind him. Alden Ravenshire did not ride in a carriage, nor did he boast a flashy steed. He walked, and the ground seemed to yield to his boots. He was devastatingly handsome, but in a harsh, unforgiving way. His jaw was sharp, his dark hair swept back, and his eyes, a striking, unnatural shade of icy silver, held a profound, ancient boredom that was far more terrifying than anger. He exuded an aura so heavy, so suffocatingly dominant, that several Blackwood wolves in the courtyard fell to their knees involuntarily. And beside him, stalking with a terrifying, predatory grace, was the war beast. Ivalice clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. It was a dire wolf, but one touched by some dark, primordial magic. It was the size of a warhorse, its fur as black as pitch, seemingly absorbing the daylight. Its eyes glowed with a feral crimson intelligence. It didn't wear a collar or chains. It moved in absolute synchronicity with King Alden, a deadly extension of the king's own will. Clyde hurried down the front steps, bowing so deeply he nearly scraped his forehead against the cobblestones. "Your Majesty," Clyde announced, his voice trembling slightly despite his desperate attempt at confidence, "the Blackwood Pack welcomes you. I am Alpha Clyde Matthews, and this is my beautiful mate Phoebe, and my prized daughter, Faye." Alden stopped. He didn't look at Phoebe. He barely glanced at Faye, who was practically vibrating with the effort to look alluring. His silver eyes swept over Clyde with a look of mild distaste, as if inspecting a piece of rotting fruit. "Matthews," Alden's voice was a low rumble, smooth as velvet but cold as a glacier. "Your lands are poorly guarded, and your pack smells of fear. I detest fear." Clyde swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. We were merely overwhelmed by the honor of your presence, my king." The war beast let out a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the stones. Ivalice felt it in her teeth. "Let us get this over with," Alden said, brushing past Clyde without waiting for an invitation. "Show me the ledgers you promised, and fetch me wine. The journey was long, and my patience is remarkably short." The evening devolved into a tense, agonizing affair. Ivalice was confined to the kitchen, tasked with polishing the silver until her fingers bled. But disaster struck when one of the maids, a terrified young girl named Lila Ross, dropped a tray of roasted meats destined for the king's table, spraining her ankle in the process. "Someone has to take the wine in," the head cook panicked, looking around wildly. Every servant took a collective step back, terrified of entering the great hall with the king and his monster. Ivalice sighed, a deep, tired sound. She knew if the wine was delayed, Clyde would take it out on all of them. "I'll do it," Ivalice said softly, taking the heavy silver tray laden with a crystal decanter and jeweled goblets. She kept her head bowed, her ragged dress a stark contrast to the opulent silver, and pushed open the doors to the great hall, stepping straight into the lion's den. The great hall was silent, save for the crackling of the massive fireplace and the anxious, shallow breathing of the Blackwood elites. Alden sat at the head of the table, looking utterly disinterested as Clyde blathered on about trade routes and territorial borders. The war beast lay by the fireplace, a mountain of dark fur, seemingly asleep, though its ears twitched at every sound. Ivalice moved like a ghost, her footsteps silent. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, focusing solely on not tripping over her own frayed hem. She approached the king's right side, carefully reaching out to pour the dark ruby-red wine into his goblet. Suddenly, Shane Perry, one of Clyde's most aggressive and arrogant enforcers who had been drinking heavily, slammed his fist on the table. "I say we push the southern border, my king, show them true strength." The sudden, violent noise startled Ivalice. Her tired muscles spasmed, and the heavy crystal decanter slipped an inch from her grasp. She caught it, but not before a single vibrant drop of red wine splashed onto the cuff of King Alden's pristine white shirt. Time stopped. The silence that followed was so profound it was deafening. Clyde's eyes bulged from his skull. His face contorted from shock into absolute, unadulterated rage. To him, this wasn't just a spilled drop of wine. It was Ivelisse ruining his life, proving him incompetent in front of the most powerful man in the world. "You clumsy, worthless wretch!" Clyde bellowed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. Before Ivelisse could even gasp an apology, Clyde lunged out of his chair. He didn't just slap her. He threw a closed fist with all his alpha strength behind it. The blow connected with her jaw with a sickening crack. Ivelisse was thrown backward, the tray clattering violently to the floor, shattering the crystal. She hit the stone ground hard, pain exploding in her head, the taste of fresh blood flooding her mouth. The room spun wildly. "Get up!" Clyde roared, advancing on her, unbuckling his heavy belt. "I'll teach you to embarrass me, you useless mistake!" Ivelisse curled into a ball, squeezing her eyes shut, instinctively preparing for the flurry of blows she knew was coming. She waited for the agony. But it didn't come. Instead, a sound ripped through the hall that defied description, a roar so primal, so furiously territorial that the glass in the windows spiderwebbed. The war beast was no longer asleep by the fire. It moved faster than the eye could track. When Ivelisse opened her tear-filled eyes, the first thing she saw was Clyde, frozen in terror, his belt raised mid-air. Standing between them was a wall of black fur and muscle. The war beast. The monster snapped its massive jaws inches from Clyde's face, a clear, lethal warning. Clyde stumbled backward, falling over a chair in his haste to get away, his face pale as death. Then, the unthinkable happened. The beast turned toward Ivelisse. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed, assuming the monster was about to finish her off. Ivelisse trembled, looking up into those glowing crimson eyes, but there was no malice in them. The beast lowered its massive head, sniffing the blood on her cheek. It let out a soft, almost distressed whine. Slowly, deliberately, the terrifying creature bent its front legs. The Alpha King's war beast bowed its head and knelt before her. A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. The beast nudged her gently with its giant wet nose, an offering of comfort, before it slowly rose to its full, terrifying height. It positioned itself directly over her small, battered body, forming an impenetrable shield of muscle and fangs, its burning eyes locked onto Clyde Matthews with the promise of a very painful death. No one dared to breathe. The only sound in the great hall was the low, continuous, rumbling growl emanating from the war beast's cavernous chest, a sound that vibrated the very marrow in the bones of everyone present. Clyde was crawling backward on his hands and knees, absolutely terrified, his leather belt forgotten on the stone floor. Slowly, deliberately, Alden Ravenshire stood up. He didn't look at the spilled wine on his cuff. He didn't look at his enraged enforcers, nor did he acknowledge the pathetic whimpering of the Blackwood Alpha. Alden Ravenshire, a man who had slaughtered entire armies without a flicker of remorse, felt his own breath hitch in his lungs. His piercing silver eyes were fixed entirely on the small, broken girl huddled beneath the protective mass of his fiercest companion. Alden felt a strange, violent pulling in his chest, an ache that bordered on physical agony. And then the scent hit him. It wasn't just the sharp metallic tang of her fresh blood, though that alone made his inner wolf claw at his ribcage in a desperate frenzy to protect. It was something underneath it, a delicate, intoxicating aroma of fresh rainwater and wild, blooming jasmine. It hit him with the force of a tidal wave, unraveling the tight, icy control he had maintained over his own soul for centuries. Mate. The word echoed in his mind, ancient, irrefutable, and entirely overwhelming. Fascinating, Alden murmured. The single word cut through the heavy tension of the hall like a sharpened blade. He walked around the long oak table, his steps measured and lethal. As he approached, the war beast didn't growl. Instead, the massive creature took half a step back, parting perfectly to allow its master access to the girl. Alden knelt smoothly among the spilled wine and broken crystal glass, completely disregarding his impossibly expensive clothes. He reached out a large, battle-calloused hand. Ivelisse flinched violently, squeezing her eyes shut, her body instinctively preparing for another agonizing strike. Alden froze. A flicker of genuine, burning, unadulterated fury crossed his stoic features, not directed at her, but at the flinch itself. It broke something fundamental inside him to see his mate cower from his touch. Slowly, he softened his movements, reaching out to gently cup her bruised cheek, tilting her chin upward. His touch was shockingly warm. The moment his skin made contact with hers, a jolt of pure electricity surged through Ivelisse's core, chasing away the freezing chill of the stone floor. It felt like coming home after a long, brutal winter. "Look at me," he commanded. The tone was soft, but it carried the weight of an absolute, unbreakable order. Ivelisse opened her eyes, her breath catching as she met the silver gaze of the Alpha King. She expected to find the cruelty of a tyrant. Instead, she found a swirling storm of complex emotions, a fierce, protective possessiveness that made her heart race for entirely new reasons. "What is your name?" he asked, his thumb gently tracing the line of her uninjured cheekbone. Ivelisse," she stammered, wincing as a sharp throb radiated from her jaw. Alden stood up, his hand lingering on her shoulder for a fraction of a second before he turned. His demeanor shifted instantly from terrifyingly tender to unimaginably deadly. He looked at Clyde, who was now being helped to his feet by a shaking Ricky Jenkins. "Alpha Matthews," Alden said, the temperature in the room seeming to plummet 10 degrees. "You introduced me to your mate. You introduced me to your prized daughter." His lip curled in disgust as he glanced at Faye, who had foolishly taken half a step forward in a vain attempt to draw his eye. At the movement, Goliath snapped his jaws in Faye's direction, causing the girl to shriek and scramble backward into her mother's arms. Alden's attention snapped back to Clyde. "You failed to mention this one." Phoebe stepped forward, her face pale but her ambition overriding her survival instincts. She tried to salvage the situation with her usual poisonous charm. "Your Majesty, please forgive the disruption. Ivelisse is, well, she is deeply troubled, a servant girl who is unwell in the mind. Clyde was merely trying to protect your honor from her insolence. She is a mistake of his past, nothing more." Alden's eyes locked onto Phoebe. "Speak to me again without permission, woman, and I will have Basil remove your tongue. It is a promise, not a threat." Phoebe's jaw snapped shut with an audible click, the blood draining entirely from her face. Alden looked back at the trembling Alpha. "A servant girl. And yet, she shares your scent. Diluted, thankfully, but it is undeniably there. You treat your own blood like a feral, starving dog. You dress her in rags, you work her to the bone. And worse," Alden took a slow step forward, his voice dropping to a lethal, vibrating whisper that carried to every corner of the silent hall. "You strike what belongs to me." Clyde blinked, his mind struggling to process the impossible. "Belongs to you? Sire, I don't understand." "My beast does not kneel to servants, Matthews," Alden interrupted, his silver eyes flashing with a dangerous predatory light. "He is an ancient creature of war, forged in blood and shadow. He bows only to his king, and it seems to his queen." The room erupted into shocked, terrified whispers. Faye let out a strangled, furious noise, her face twisting in ugly jealousy, while Clyde looked as though he might vomit right there on the Persian rug. "Goliath," Alden commanded. The beast gently nudged Ivelisse's shoulder with its snout, encouraging her to stand. She tried, but her legs, shaking from adrenaline and pain, immediately buckled. Alden was there in an instant. He swept her effortlessly into his arms, pulling her tight against his broad chest. She weighed nothing to him, so fragile and light that it made his heart ache with a fury he hadn't felt in centuries. "The alliance is dead, Matthews," Alden declared, his voice ringing with absolute crushing finality. "I am taking my mate. If you, your venomous wife, your arrogant enforcers, or any of your pathetic mutts ever cross into my territory or even dare to speak her name aloud, I will return. And I will burn this estate to the ash it deserves to be, with all of you screaming inside it." He turned on his heel, holding Ivelisse securely as he strode toward the grand double doors. Basil Turner smirked at Clyde, a chilling, knowing smile that promised future violence, before turning to follow his king. The war beast brought up the rear, snapping its jaws one last time at Shane Perry, who stumbled backward and crashed into a serving cart in sheer terror. As they walked out into the cool, crisp night air, the oppressive atmosphere of the Blackwood estate finally lifted. Ivelisse rested her head against the king's chest. She could smell pine needles, fresh snow, and an intoxicating masculinity. The rhythmic, steady beating of his heart became her only anchor in a world that had just been completely, beautifully upended. "You're safe now, little bird," Alden whispered into her dark hair, his grip tightening protectively as they walked toward his awaiting guards. "No one will ever hurt you again." The capital of the Northern Kingdom, the Obsidian Keep, was nothing like the gloomy Blackwood estate. It was massive, carved from dark stone, but it was filled with light, roaring fires, and a strange, bustling warmth. Ivelisse woke up in a bed larger than her old bedroom, engulfed in silk sheets and the lingering scent of pine and ozone. For a panicked second, she thought she was dead. Then, The dull throb in her jaw reminded her she was very much alive. "Ah, you're awake," a cheerful voice chimed. A woman with bright red hair and a warm smile bustled into the room, carrying a tray of steaming broth and salves. "I am Ingrid Olsen, head healer and occasionally the only person in this castle with common sense. King Alden has been pacing a hole in the floorboards outside your door for 2 days." 2 days? Ivelisse rasped, sitting up slowly. "You are exhausted, honey. Malnourished, bruised, and emotionally battered," Ingrid said, her eyes softening with sympathy as she applied a cooling green salve to Ivelisse's jaw. "But you're safe here. I promise." Life at the keep was a bizarre, wonderful dream. Ivelisse was treated not just as a guest, but with an intense, almost fearful reverence by the staff. This was largely due to Goliath, the massive war beast, who had decided his new life's purpose was to be her personal, terrifying shadow. One afternoon, Ivelisse was sitting in the sunlit library reading a book. Goliath was sprawled on his back beside her chair, all 4 massive paws in the air, tongue lolling out in a distinctly unmenacing fashion. Alden walked in, stopping to stare at the bizarre sight. He looked at the deadly beast, then at Ivelisse, raising a dark eyebrow. "He is ruining his reputation," Alden noted dryly. Ivelisse giggled, a sound that surprised even herself. "He's just a big puppy, really. I think he likes having his belly scratched." Alden stepped closer, the playful atmosphere shifting into something heavier, more charged. "He is an ancient weapon of mass destruction, Ivelisse. But he has good taste." Alden sat on the edge of the table near her chair. He looked tired, the weight of the crown evident in the lines around his eyes. "How are you healing?" "Better," she said softly. "Thank you, Alden, for everything." Alden's expression darkened slightly. "You don't need to thank me for basic decency. It enrages me to think of what you endured there." He reached out, his long fingers gently tracing the fading bruise on her cheek. "I'm a man of war, Ivelisse. My world is violent. I never expected the goddess to gift me someone so soft. I don't want my darkness to break you." Ivelisse looked into his silver eyes, seeing the vulnerability hiding behind the Alpha King's mask. She reached up, placing her small hand over his. "I survived Clyde Matthews," she said, her voice steady and fierce. "I scrubbed floors while being kicked. I am not soft, Alden. I just choose to be kind. There's a difference." A slow, breathtaking smile spread across Alden's face. It transformed him entirely. He leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. "My brave queen," he murmured. Just then, a loud crash interrupted the moment. They turned to see Goliath, having rolled over in his sleep, knocking over a priceless Ming vase. The beast blinked awake, looking guiltily at the shattered porcelain, gave a soft boof, and hid his massive head under his paws. Alden sighed deeply, rubbing the bridge of his nose. That was an antique. Ivelisse burst out laughing, and for the first time in her life she felt truly, genuinely happy. Winter arrived at the Obsidian Keep with a fierce, beautiful grace. The pack was preparing for the Winter Solstice Festival. Ivelisse, now radiant and fully assuming her role as Luna, was helping Ingrid and Ricky, who had surprisingly defected from Blackwood after seeing the king's power, begging for mercy and a job as a lowly clerk, coordinate the decorations. But peace is a fragile thing. The attack came at twilight. The warning bells of the keep rang out in frantic, terrifying peals. Basil Turner rushed into the courtyard, covered in snow and blood. "Rogues, sire!" Basil shouted over the howling wind. "Dozens of them! They've breached the lower gates, and they aren't acting alone." Alden's face hardened into a mask of pure lethality. He turned to Ivelisse. "Stay with Ingrid in the central keep. Do not come out." "Alden, wait!" she started, but he was already shifting, bones cracking, muscles expanding, until a massive silver-furred wolf stood in his place, radiating power. With a howl that shook the snow from the trees, he charged into the fray, Goliath tearing after him like a shadow of death. From the high balcony of the keep, Ivelisse watched the chaos below. Torches illuminated the bloody skirmish. And then she saw him. Standing at the edge of the tree line, directing the rogues, was Shane Perry. And next to him, looking desperate and deranged, was her father, Clyde Matthews. They hadn't come for territory. They had come to kidnap the king's weakness. They had come for her, to use as leverage. "They're trying to flank the king," Ricky stammered, pointing a shaking finger. "Shane knows the blind spots of standard defenses." Ivelisse's heart pounded, but the old fear was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective fire. She knew Clyde's tactics. He was a coward who always attacked from behind. "Ricky, Ingrid," Ivelisse commanded, her voice ringing with newfound alpha authority. "They aren't trying to breach the front. It's a distraction. Clyde is taking a squad through the old servant tunnels on the east wall. He used to brag about reading the keep's original blueprints." Ingrid gasped. "The east wall is lightly guarded." "Not anymore," Ivelisse said. She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "Show me the entrance to the tunnels." When Clyde, Shane, and 5 rogue wolves kicked open the heavy iron grate leading into the keep cellars, they expected to find terrified servants. Instead, they found the Luna of the Northern Kingdom waiting for them, flanked by Ingrid wielding a crossbow and Basil Turner, who had been redirected just in time thanks to Ivelisse's warning. "Hello, Father," Ivelisse said, her voice ice-cold. Clyde snarled. "You ungrateful little bitch, grab her!" Before Shane could even take a step, a massive crash shook the foundations. The cellar doors were ripped off their hinges. Alden, still in his magnificent silver wolf form, stalked into the room, his fur matted with snow and the blood of his enemies. Behind him, Goliath let out a deafening roar. Clyde dropped his weapon, falling to his knees, his arrogance entirely evaporated. "Alden, please, King Alden, it was Shane's idea," he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at his accomplice. Alden shifted back to his human form, naked but entirely unbothered, his eyes blazing with lethal intent. He didn't even look at Clyde. He looked at Ivelisse, ensuring she was unharmed. "Basil," Alden said softly, "take them to the dungeons. I will deal with them tomorrow. Ensure it is unpleasant." As the traitors were dragged away screaming, Alden walked over to Ivelisse. He gently took the iron poker from her trembling hands and pulled her into a fierce, consuming embrace. "You defied my order to hide," he whispered into her hair. "I was protecting my home," she replied, wrapping her arms around his waist, "and my king." Alden pulled back slightly, cupping her face, his thumb stroking her cheek. "My equal. My queen." He kissed her then, a kiss full of fire, relief, and a promise of forever. A heavy, wet nose nudged Ivelisse's thigh. She broke the kiss, laughing as Goliath wedged his massive head between them, whining for attention. The monsters of her past were locked away in the dark, and the monsters of her present only wanted to be loved. Ivelisse leaned against Alden, her hand resting on the beast's head, finally, truly home. Writing Ivelisse's journey really hit home for me. I think we've all had moments where the people who should have protected us ended up being the ones we needed protection from. To me, Ivelisse isn't just a fantasy character. She represents that quiet, unbreakable resilience we all have to summon when life pushes us to our limits. It's a reminder that kindness isn't weakness, and that true strength is finding the courage to stay soft in a harsh world. I loved writing the dynamic between her and Alden, proving that sometimes the monsters we are warned about are the only ones capable of seeing our true worth and fiercely defending it. Thank you so much for taking the time to read this story. If Ivelisse's journey struck a chord with you, I would absolutely love it if you could hit the like button, share it with fellow romance and fantasy readers, and subscribe to my channel. It genuinely means the world to me and helps me keep bringing these worlds to life for you. Have you ever found strength in unexpected places or realized a perceived monster was actually your biggest protector? Let's chat about it in the comments below.